bringing in drugs. They're making weapons.
Working in the Supermax prison, it'll definitely make you tougher.
Prisons in America. It's an entirely different world within these walls.
Ask yourself, can you live in a bathroom for 10 years?
Drugs, harassment, gangs, and constant danger dominate life here. For over 1 million people incarcerated in 2024, this is their reality.
You're going down in this bit, man.
Today, I have a list of the worst prisons in America for you. Number 1, Rikers Island, New York. Covering about 400 acres in New York. Not only is it one of the largest correctional facilities and mental institutions in the world, but it is also one of the most well-known. But that's not what the former inmates say. According to one of them, there's no mental health assistance, it's every man for himself. But it's no easier for the officers either. The violence and depravity they have to go through daily will make you cower in fear. Every step they take in the facility, there is a danger of someone throwing excrements at them, and if not, there's assault, despite officials' efforts to improve conditions like banning strip searches, ending solitary confinement, and implementing daily SWAT team searches to seize weapons. The issues exist just like they did since day one. In response, the city has announced plans to replace Prison Island with 4 smaller jails by 2026, aiming to reduce violence and improve conditions. Number 2, San Quentin State Prison. Over time, it earned a grim reputation as one of the harshest facilities in America. The prison has seen tragic incidents, including 6 deaths during a single escape attempt. Most importantly, though, San Quentin housed the largest death row in the Western Hemisphere, nearly 700 inmates at its peak. The men in San Quentin are among the most dangerous. One inmate killed his cellmate just to be sent to death row and get an appeal. Yet despite their brutal crimes, many there believe their punishment is too harsh. They argue that their treatment, being allowed out of their cells for only 20 hours a week, and even then only after a strip search, still in handcuffs and escorted, is inhumane. Nevertheless, because of the California Governor Gavin Newsom, San Quentin's death row will be soon shut down. Number 3, Holman Correctional Facility. Holman Prison first opened its doors in 1969, and within 5 years, there was a riot that resulted in the deaths of 2 officers. And this marked the start of what would be a killer reign. One officer was killed while taking an inmate to his cell. But the staff at this facility was just as corrupt. The one who ran the prison canteen was caught with drugs. In fact, back in 2016, a fight between 2 inmates turned into a riot involving 100 inmates. In March 2019, a group of inmates transferred from another facility began a hunger strike while in solitary confinement at Holman because they were concerned for their safety. Finally, in late January 2020, this understaffed and overcrowded prison was announced to be mostly closed, but the death row and the execution chamber were to remain at Holman. Number 4, Red Onion State Prison, a supermax prison designed to keep in the worst of the worst inmates. More than 55% of inmates there have sentences longer than 15 years, and 12% have life sentences. Inside, they spend more than 20 hours per day with limited access to educational programs and family visits. The conditions are harsh. Solitary confinement is overused, with even more than 170 mentally ill inmates being kept in isolation. Guards have been using firearms, electroshock weapons, and 5-point restraints as punishment. An inmate, Kowalski Bass, allegedly died after guards ignored his pleas for help during an attack. But despite all this, the brutal truth is, Red Onion's use of solitary confinement is way more harsh on the inmates than any other things there. Number 5, Mississippi State Penitentiary. The Mississippi State Penitentiary, a prison farm in 1901, used to force prisoners to do harsh agricultural labor. The prisoners today still work on the prison farm and in manufacturing workshops, often not even receiving proper compensation. And the death rate of this place? It once used to be as high as 16%, but even now it isn't any better. Just in 2019, There were 10 killings alone. And why wouldn't they be? Weapons, drugs, gangs, violence is an everyday matter. Not to mention that at one point, Parchman had imprisoned more than 3,200 inmates, which is way more than what it was designed to hold. Temperatures in some units reached up to 145 degrees Fahrenheit. It's literally hell in there. Shockingly, it wasn't until 2022 that a Department of Justice report ordered the state to begin installing air conditioning units to combat the extreme heat, a first in Parchman's 121-year history. Number 6. United States Penitentiary Pollock. The violence in this prison is gameplay. William Anthony Bullock was stabbed by another prisoner, Sean Wayne Williams, in 2007, and it's safe to say it wasn't an isolated incident. Just 3 years later, in 2010, Stephen Prater lost his life in a fight with another inmate, and Carlton Coltrane suffered the same fate. In 2006, a convicted killer, Richard Lee McNair, designed an escape pod, hid it under outgoing mail bags, and broke out of the prison during a regular transport. Rafael Torres followed his path in 2017, and Sadar Dakarcade in 2016. Even inside the prison, the favoritism regarding where you're from runs rampant. Oh, and did I mention the 23-hour lockdowns, racial discrimination, and the extreme terrorists housed there? Yeah, this one is definitely not for the weak. Number 7. Central California Women's Facility, not the largest female correctional institution in California. Covering 640 acres, this state prison accommodates women across all security levels, including those on death row. As of April 2020, Chowchilla operated well beyond its intended capacity with 2,640 inmates. In 2023, 29 former inmates filed a lawsuit against the state and staff, accusing Officer Israel Trevino Jr. of abuse even after his termination in 2018. As far back as 2016, a report by the Prison Law Office exposed harassment and threats from the staff towards inmates. The prison didn't even handle these complaints properly or protect the inmates from retaliation at all. Number 8. Terre Haute. In Indiana, there's a complex of prisons in Terre Haute that covers everything from maximum security to medium and even low security units. This place is where the U.S. federal government carries out its executions. Solitary confinement here isn't just about isolation. It's about relentless noise that keeps prisoners sleep-deprived and recreation, which is limited to 3 times a week in outdoor cages. Some say it's a torture cell more than a prison. Currently, it holds 40 men awaiting execution. Then, there are the prison's communication management units, which severely restrict inmate communication with the outside world. They get just 2 2-hour visits per month and a 15-minute phone call per week, where all conversations have to be in English, and even the mail they get is thoroughly screened before reaching them. Number 9. Pelican Bay State Prison. From the beginning, guards at Pelican Bay State Prison have set a tone of aggression towards inmates, particularly in the security housing unit. In 1992, Vaughn Dortch, whose mental health was already suffering, got severe burns after guards bathed him in scalding water. Legal intervention came in 1995 when Federal District Court Judge Thelton Henderson ruled in Madrid v. Gomez that the prison's practices were unconstitutional. This prison has been literal hell, from severe beatings and forced nudity to orchestrated fights between rival gang members, which sometimes even resulted in guards intervening with gunfire. Inmates are locked up for about 22.5 hours a day in small, windowless cells, with only 90 minutes allotted for exercise in concrete yards. Number 10. United States Penitentiary Leavenworth. Opened in 1895, the U.S. Penitentiary at Leavenworth was the first institution of the federal prison system. What makes this prison truly dangerous are the inmates it has housed. In 1910, 6 prisoners escaped by taking control of a train and crashing through the prison gates. Then, in 1936, 7 inmates, with the help of gangsters, took the warden hostage, and fled the facility. The prison has also been the site of executions, including that of serial killer Karl Panzram in 1930. Violence among inmates remains a problem to this day. Recently, on March 1st, the entire prison went on lockdown for nearly 2 months after a firearm was found inside. Inmates claim they were treated worse than animals, with no communication allowed with their families and not even being fed properly. Number 11. United States Penitentiary, Bowmont. Violence, riots, escapes, overcrowding, understaffing, and the presence of high-risk inmates make this prison what it is. On March 3, 2014, Ricky Fackrell and Christopher Kramer, members of the white supremacist gang, Soldiers of Aryan Culture, brutally stabbed fellow inmate Leo Johns to death. Back in 2008, an inmate lost his life after he was strangled in his cell by 2 others, one of whom co-founded a prison gang, Dead Man Incorporated. More recently, 13 Gang violently attacked associates of the Mexican Mafia and the Sureños. 4 inmates were severely injured, and 2, Andrew Pineda and Guillermo Riojas, succumbed to their injuries. The entire federal prison system was placed on a nationwide lockdown after this. Number 12. Cook County Jail. In 2018, a massive fight broke out among inmates. Punches were thrown, some were stomped, some were kicked. But that's just a glimpse of what happens there. As of 2017, Cook County Jail is the largest single-site jail in the country, housing over 5,500 inmates. In 2008, a class action lawsuit was filed against the jail. The allegations included inmates being bitten by rats while they slept and mandatory inner urethra swabs for STD checks on male inmates during intake, and not to mention the beatings by correctional officers using handcuffs as brass knuckles. 113 correctional officers died on the job, with 40% of those deaths resulting from transportation accidents and another 40% from assaults or other violent acts. Number 13. Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola, has been labeled the worst prison in America. It was a former slave plantation, and at the moment, it's the largest maximum security prison in the US, with more than 6,000 prisoners. More than 90% sent to prison end up spending their last days in this very prison and even buried on the same land. 74% of Angola's inmates are black, working in the same fields, picking crops the enslaved black people did back in the day. They don't even get paid $1 per hour for the work they do, it's merely cents. But even after working all day, in temperatures as high as 115 degrees, the prisoners don't get any air conditioning and hardly any medical help at all. Oh, and did I mention that this place was known as the bloodiest prison in the nation, with people killing themselves by hangings and stabbings being common among inmates. Number 14. Folsom State Prison. During the 1970s and 1980s, it was a battleground, rampant with violence and dominated by Mexican Mafia, Black Guerrilla Family, and other prison gangs. But more specifically, this prison has a long history of riots, dating all the way back to 1927. In that year, inmates armed with firearms started a bloody riot, resulting in the deaths of 1 guard and 7 inmates in an attempt to take control of the prison. More recently, in 2010, a riot involving 200 inmates led to the hospitalization of 7 federal inmates after corrections officers used firearms. Even in 2019, 2 inmates fatally attacked a fellow prisoner in a general population yard. Shockingly, even in 2020, the prison was operating at 130% over its capacity, and that too while there were staff cuts. Number 15. Sing Sing Correctional Facility. Don't be fooled by the name, because this very prison happens to be the most deadly institutions in America. Old Sparky, the electric chair, has seen the end of the line for espionage criminals Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, as well as the infamous serial killer and cannibal Albert Fish, among 600 others. The history of this place is filled with harsh conditions and brutal treatment. One of the previous wardens, Elam Lins, introduced the Auburn system here. This system included strict silence and harsh punishments like whippings with the cat-o'-nine tails. The conditions were tough, to say the least, but it wasn't just the harsh rules that made life difficult here. The most notorious criminals stayed in this facility, bringing in drugs, violence, and all sorts of trouble. Number 16, Maricopa Tent City Prison. This facility was created due to overcrowding in other Maricopa County jails. It started with 82 tents and, at its peak, housed up to 1,700 inmates. The tents offered no heating in winter and no cooling in summer, with temperatures inside reaching to a blistering 145 degrees Fahrenheit. The tents were made from old Korean War materials, not meant for long-term use. On top of that, inmates had to wear pink underwear, and male prisoners were made to wear chain gang stripes to humiliate and dehumanize them. And you can just imagine how inadequate the medical care was. People even ended up dying. For instance, a diabetic inmate died after being denied medical attention. To no one's surprise, this prison also had a violent history, with inmates frequently beaten and stabbed. Number 17, Ateka Correctional Facility. Up next is a prison with a history so notable, it has been immortalized in books and films. This is Ateka Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison constructed in 1931. Ironically, it was built in response to riots within the New York State prison system to serve as a modern solution. Instead, conditions here are so bad that riots have become common here. Inmates spent at least 14 hours a day confined to their cells, extreme overcrowding, poor food, little to no medical care, and treatment worse than that of animals. Then came September 1971. Over 2,000 inmates took control of the prison, holding 42 staff members hostage for 4 days. The standoff ended in tragedy, with 43 killed in a brutal police response. The aftermath led to some reforms, yet Ateka remains a maximum security facility to this day. It often houses inmates removed from other facilities due to disciplinary issues. Despite its reforms, Ateka is still considered one of the worst prisons due to the lack of transparency about the 1971 riot. Number 18, Alan B. Palansky Unit. And if you end up in this prison located in Texas, you can say goodbye to your days of freedom in every sense of the word. It's been designed to house the men on the state of Texas death row, but it wasn't always the one. In 1998, an escape shook the death row facility before this, the Ellis Unit, when an inmate managed to break free only to meet his end in a nearby creek. This led to the relocation of the death row, and the Palansky Unit became the new choice. Life for many inmates in this prison is marked by solitary confinement that lasts for years. With little to no human contact and no access to basic amenities like phones and TVs, it's no wonder that depression, anxiety, and even taking one's own life is pretty common there. And entertainment time, an hour at most. Even when they are let out, inmates are segregated into separate cages, which isolates them from one another even more. With a maximum capacity of 2,900 inmates, but often holding more, this unit ends up torturing prisoners in way more than just solitary confinement. Number 19, ADX Florence. You might know this one by the name of Florence Supermax, which is in Fremont County, Colorado. It was built back in 1994 because there was an extreme need to incarcerate high-risk inmates who were prone to violence in a specialized facility, and this place houses the worst of the worst criminals. Mind you, this one is a supermax prison, which means the security is way higher than the regular maximum security prisons. There's motion detectors, 1,400 remote-controlled steel doors, and heavily armed perimeter patrols. The inmates in question are given single concrete cells where they have to stay for up to 23 hours, supervised 24 hours a day, by way more staff than the inmates. They get just a concrete bed, toilet, and sink. That's it. Not to mention, in 2012, a lawsuit revealed that the inmates here didn't even get medication or any care at all if they were mentally sick. Number 20, Twin Towers Correctional Facility. The next one takes us to Los Angeles, where you'll find the world's largest jail, spanning over 1.5 million square feet and housing almost 9,500 inmates. It's hard to believe that this massive complex sat empty for years due to lack of funding after it opened in 1997. Some people say it's more like a mental institution disguised as a jail. At one time, around 6,000 inmates at Twin Towers were on medication and lived in an underfunded and understaffed environment that some describe as insane. Each day, 500 to 600 inmates were assessed and color-coded based on their conditions. Despite state-of-the-art security systems, the facility made it to the news when an inmate, Kevin Jerome Pullum, pulled off a daring escape just 2 hours after being convicted. He used a modified ID badge with a photo of actor Eddie Murphy to trick the guards. In 2013, Twin Towers gained a reputation as one of the 10 worst county jails in the US. And that's all for today. Share your thoughts in the comments. Which prison shocked you the most? If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.